Okay, good morning, class. Let's go ahead and take a look at this assignment that was posted. It's the annotated bibliography. First, we do need to cover a few things, though, right? So, the essay we are working on is the QEP, which is requiring you to visit a location, right? We've gone through some suggestions and locations, we've gone through the outline and the expectations for it. But now I want to focus on the articles specifically that you're going to be using with that. So this assignment that I posted, the annotated bibliography, um, has a few parts to it. But first, we need to understand what exactly is summarizing. How can we and how should we summarize the articles that we've decided to use in correlation to the QEP? Again, as a refresher, the QEP is going to require that you use three outside sources or articles related to the location that you are going to visit. And so, in order to for them to qualify, the first one should be a source that is published or printed by the location, right? So that means it can either be um, a website, as for example, some of the links that I've included in the slide on suggestions for areas you might want to visit. That presentation has links that you can click on that would then take you to the official web pages with information that is published by the source, right? So Concordia Cemetery has their own website you could visit, and it'll have different sections to it, but it'll have any sort of information that you might need. Sorry about that. These keys are clicking themselves, it looks like. Anyways, the that's a primary source, right? That's going to be your first article or uh, yeah, I guess an article or source that you're going to use in relationship to your essay. And so um, the annotated bib is going to see if you're citing the source correctly, and it's also going to ask you to summarize your article, so that way I can review the information and make sure it's exactly what needs to be in that situation. And so again, the second source you're going to need is some sort of review, whether it's on TripAdvisor, Yelp, Google, or if you can find a printed one on a newspaper. Um, you're more than welcome to use any one of those. But the thing that it needs to have, as far as a review, it needs to have some deep information or some depth to it, right? It needs to have information about a specific situation or a specific thing that they experienced, that they either enjoyed or didn't enjoy. Again, it can agree with you, it could disagree with you, whatever you feel is best, but it has to be more than just an article or a review that says, "Oh, I like this place. The food was good," or "I liked it. The atmosphere was nice." And if that's the end of the art, the review, there's not a lot to work with, and it's probably not worth using. So you need to find an article that says, "I went to this location expecting this particular food was brought out, and while I found it wasn't the best when I got my dessert, it was wonderful. Also, the staff was super friendly. They kept making sure that I had my refill and that I was taken care of, right? They even brought me extra napkins without me having to ask." Whatever it's going to be, right? You want to talk about the experience. You want that review to have some detail about their experience there, such as the one I just gave. And so, again, in your annotated bib, you're going to cite that in a full citation format, as we had discussed previously, and then you're going to summarize the article into a few lines. After that, of course, the third article is going to be one that's published in a newspaper or a news source that discusses your location. Well, I would prefer that you find a news article that talks about it locally, right? Something in the El Paso Times, El Diario, the Las Cruces Sun, I think is what it's called. Uh, you can uh, you can expand past that if you find an article, or if you can't find an article that you want to use or any information that's helpful in uh, those local print sources. So in the example I will show you, I have one from the Huff Post, which, while I would also agree that this is sort of a biased news source, um, it's not talking about politics, and that's why I feel that this is perfectly fine to talk about, to use this article, because it's not talking about politics in any way. It's simply reviewing and talking about a bar. Um, right. That's the the bar in question is Rose's Cantina, the one that we looked at in the outline or the sample essay that I've provided for you all. And so let's go ahead and take a look at the steps for for summarizing and then annotating your articles, right? So the first thing you need to do is you need to identify as much information about the article and the publisher as possible, right? Who's the author? What is the information given in the title? Sometimes the title is brief, but it's enough to try and focus on what the paper is going to cover, right? And so what is the title of the article saying? Because that's usually going to be what the article is trying to present. Next, consider what source has published this information, right? Where are you getting this information? And then what date was this article published, right? The newer the article, the more current information it's going to have, and overall the more reliable it's going to be. So I would always suggest that if you find something that's a little too old, in this case that talks about a restaurant or a location that's maybe 20 years old, it's probably a lot has changed and been updated. So I would not use anything that's over. Actually, as a matter of fact, I wouldn't use anything that's over 10 years old. And so just try to make sure that it's as recent as possible. And if you have the choice between one that's newer and one that's older, I would always suggest you go with the newer article in that case. So next, you want to break down the article into its parts. That means if it's a really long article or news article or review, you want to take a look at how they are separating it into is there an introduction? Is there certain main ideas that are presented in different sections? If so, go ahead and separate them into the sections. You then start to identify the key words, right? What is some of the specific information that they're providing you in one section that's going to be key to your understanding on what that part of that article is trying to get across, or what the article as a whole is trying to present to you, right? And so while this can be time consuming, it's ensuring that you're reading your article in its entirety, and that you're also understanding and digesting that information that it's presenting. So this is probably the key step. Even though it's just one little bullet point here with a sub point, it's going to be the most intensive one, because you're going to have to do a lot of work for it, right? And so after you've broken it down into its parts and you've highlighted some keywords or underlined some sections that you feel present some main ideas, it's time to connect those ideas together, right? So what are how do those keywords connect within its own section, and then how do they connect to the other sections surrounding it? And this is going to allow you to connect your ideas or the main points, maybe even the topics of that article as a whole, into one complete sorry, my cat is right on me. You got to get down. Thank you. And so it's going to allow you to connect those key parts and really connect the essay and the purpose of the article, I should say, as a whole. And that's when you're going to then have to use your own words, right? As we had discussed during the paraphrasing, you're going to have to use your own words to paraphrase or summarize those main ideas. Now, there's certain key words that cannot be avoided, right? So if you have an article that's talking about certain employees, right, and they call them the manager discussed this or that, then you can't help but to refer to that employee as the manager or the line cook or whatever it's going to be. And so in that case, you would have to use some of those keywords to express those same ideas, but wherever else, you should not be using any words that are going to say that are going to match up exactly word for word for what your article is saying, because then you're plagiarizing, right? And so the way we summarize is we take the idea and we use our words to express that same idea. And so that's why it's important to highlight the keywords, things that really can't be changed from what it is you're going to be discussing, to the next to the overarching purpose of the article, which you can then paraphrase or you can summarize, right? So again, just make sure you're using your words. You shouldn't be mixing them, right? Some of your words, some of the source's words, because that's a partial paraphrase, or that's partial plagiarism, right? So it can be looked at both ways, depending on the intent. Well, I wouldn't believe that anybody's doing it maliciously. If it happens often, then you're just not going to get credit for it, because this is not a summary of your own ideas. This is you using their words to express what the article is saying. If I wanted to know how the article says what it says, I would read the article, right? This is not so much for me to understand the article, but this is for you to be able to understand that information and that way use it effectively in your essay. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at the guidelines for the annotated bib as a whole. Are they? Okay, give me just a second. Okay, so here we are with the assignment sheet. I did notice there was some incorrect information on that assignment sheet, so I will upload the corrected one right after I'm done recording here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the expectations. So of course, the proper due date should be November 1st, meaning that it should be a Tuesday, right, when I upload my lecture. I'll give you until the end of the day to go ahead and post that annotated bibliography by then, and then of course everything else is going to be formatted as normal. You do not need a cover page, so don't worry about using a cover page. Just make sure that your name and the class period are up there in the heading information. Well, I'm sorry, not the class page, but the due date, right? So it should be your name and due date at the top of the page before you get into the annotated bibliography, and I'll go ahead and edit the sample to show you what I mean by that. And so of course it's going to be due November 1st. Everything else is the same: 12 point Times New Roman font, double spaced, 1-inch margins all the way around. Do not be messing with the margins or making them smaller or bigger on any side. And of course your references need to be cited in APA format, right? You must have those 3 sources, and they must be cited in alphabetical order with a single paragraph of annotation. Again, the annotation must be a paragraph in length, but it must be a summary of the entire article into just a few lines, maybe 4 to 5 lines, right? Again, here's the steps that we just covered. Identify the article information: author, article name, publisher information, and date. Break up the section into parts depending on its length, and then focus on keywords or topics that are repeated or discussed within that article. Then begin to identify the main ideas, connecting the lines between the keywords and or ideas to organize and formulate a purpose or overall intent of the article. And then use your own words to simplify the article into those few lines. So additionally, on top of, once you have that summary, I would like to see 1 or 2 sentences discussing what information you found specifically relevant to your paper, right? So what information are you planning on using within that article? Because we can summarize everything about it, but if you don't end up really using any of that information, then we're going to have an error, right? So all right, so here we go in the annotated bibliography. I didn't really need the I don't need the running head or any of that stuff. So instead, just go and put your name and then the due date, right? So it's gonna be just like that. I think it's gonna say, let's see what the error is here. Yeah, it just needs a comma. That's fine. So now let's take a look at the annotated bibliography. Instead of saying references, which it will say on your final product, this one, because the purpose of it is to annotate your sources, which is also known as a bibliography, it's going to be labeled annotated bibliography. It's going to have a single level 1 header, right? So it's bold and centered. That's going to say annotated bibliography. And then you're going to get into your sources. You'll see here that I have put them in alphabetical order, A and then A, but AM comes before AV, and then that both of those come before L, right? So it's American Decay, Avalos, and then Lanier. So make sure that yours is in alphabetical order as well, with your author's name being that first one, or the whatever the first information you provide is. Again, it's author's name. If there's not an author, for example, this one is a YouTube video, then you're going to put the channel's name, and then you're going to put the year that it was published, the name of the article here. For specifically for YouTube, it should be italicized. I don't know why it's just this way for YouTube, and you should include video in hard brackets, even though the fact that we know it's YouTube means that we should know it's a video format. But APA is a little weird, a little specific in that matter, and so this is the only thing. Now, if you omit this video, if you don't italicize this, I'm not going to give you a hard time. It's really unique and specific just to YouTube. So the thing that you really just want to make sure is that you have your author or channel name, the year of publication, the name of the article, the source that's publishing it, in this case YouTube, and then the link that leads you to that that video, right? So next, you'll notice that underneath it, there's this little paragraph. This paragraph is the annotation itself. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight this so that way we can see where it ends. Now, this in green, this is the summary, right? I say, in this YouTube video, the host interviews the new owner of Rosa's Cantina, as well as several other employees. It focuses on the bar's role in the legend of Marty Robbins' song, El Paso, right? She also discusses the popularity of the bar and the famous celebrities that have come in. One specific area of interest is where Patricia highlights the appeal of the bar. So that's where I'm saying this is what's significant about this interview. And then I go to say how I plan on using it in my essay, right? So let me highlight this a different color. So in this area, I specify that I will note how the legend of the bar is part of the draw for all sorts of people, right? So she mentions how people come from all over because they've heard of this bar in this one song by Marty Robbins. And even that her fan, a lot of her visitors come from Canada, which she mistakenly claims Marty Robbins is from Canada, which is not true. He was born in Glendale, Arizona, and that's why he was traveling between Tennessee to Arizona, because he was recording music in Tennessee. He was a big Western country music singer. And so he was on his way back to Arizona when he stopped in El Paso. And the legend goes, he saw Rosa's Cantina, pulled over, saw that it was closed, and he saw the Badlands of New Mexico in the reflection of the mirror of the window. And then he fell in love with the idea of, here's El Paso, there's New Mexico, it's wilderness, it's the Wild West. And then he writes a song about falling in love with a girl, killing her boyfriend for the right to her love, and then ultimately getting chased down by rangers when he comes back into Texas, and gunned down before he can make it to his love, right? So this is sort of the legend behind the bar. This is what draws people to it, and I specifically am interested in this idea that it's a welcoming bar for people from all over, right? And so that's why I highlight that section, because this is the part I plan on using from this article. Next, you'll see I have a review from Avalis, right? And so it's Rosa's Cantina, Google reviews. That's what it would be labeled, because it doesn't have a proper label for it, right? There's no label to the review. It just says his name, and then the review starts underneath it. But it is under Rosa's Cantina, and the section is, underneath that is Google reviews. So that's why it is attributed to them. And then, of course, the larger publishing group is Google, followed by the link that leads me to it. Now, in this one, it was a really in-depth review talking about how this person, Avalis, and his father like to travel to visit locations of interest. And one of the places they had to travel to was Rosa's Cantina, because they both grew up listening to, his dad grew up listening to Marty Robbins, and as a result of that, he would play it often for this user Avalis. It's not his name. That's just what he calls himself on the review post, but we don't know anything about him aside from that, so that's why we would attribute it to him in that way. Anyway, so he grows up listening to Marty Robbins because of his father's love for it, and he also has a fondness because it reminds him of the time he would spend with his dad riding around listening to these country westerns. And so they had to come visit. Anyways, when they got here to El Paso, apparently the bar was closing, or just about closed, meaning that the owner was walking out and locking the bar up when they rolled up, and they asked if this was the bar. And graciously, she opened up the bar for them. She allowed them in. She served them some beers. She started playing some music for them, and they listened to El Paso while drinking some beer in the fabled Western bar of his childhood memory. So I didn't include all of that because it was a little bit too dense, right? So I just summarize it and I say, in Google user Avalis's review, he discusses his personal experience of the bar, right? Being that he loved the music and he grew up listening to Marty Robbins. And then he mentions, sorry, typing too fast here. He mentions meeting the owner, right? She served them drinks and played El Paso to help them get the full Rosa's Cantina experience. Specifically, Avalis mentions that the draw stems from his father's love of the song El Paso. So here's a little bit of the summary. Again, the overall summary. And then I get to the point where I'm going to say, here's what's interesting to me, or here's what I plan on using as a quote or a paraphrase in my essay. And so I will use this to suggest that this is the same treatment and care shown to all customers, right? So I'm going to say, not only did she show this kindness for a stranger from out of town that she's never seen before, but the locals and the people who are there regularly are always prioritized, right? They make sure that everybody's comfortable, everyone's happy, everybody has what they need, and that they get to enjoy the Rosa's Cantina experience. Now, if you play El Paso in the bar, it's been played by so many visitors and people that are driving by that the locals might give you some mean looks, but I guess it's part of, they should learn to accept it because that's part of the draw. And lastly, we have Lanier and Hembry. You'll see that I've used the ampersand. You can say and or use the ampersand. Either will be perfectly fine, but you should be connecting them from one to the other. Also, specifically with two authors, you would actually switch the order. So I would take Hambry, and I would call, because his name is Daniel Hambry, or Hembry, and it would look like this. So it would be Lanier C and Daniel Hembry. But if you want to keep it the way you had it, that's perfectly fine as well, right? Last name, first initial. When you have more than two authors, it's going to be this way. When you have less than two authors, which is one, it would be this same way. So I don't know why they just switched it up for two authors specifically. But whatever you choose, I just want to make sure that you have your authors identified and located. Now, if there's one, it's last name, first initial. That's always going to be the way to go. If it's two, you can do it either way. You can do last name, first initial, ampersand, and, or first name, then last name, or you can put last name, first initial in the same format. When it's three or more, then it has to be last name, first initial, last name, first initial, last name, first initial, separated by commas until you get to the last one. And then you would put the ampersand or and then the final name. So then you'll see I have the year of publication, 2013. Rosa's Cantina, one of the most famous bars in the world. Though you may not know it, this is the full name of the article. The parentheses are also part of the article name. And so I would keep it like that. Then I have the publishing information, which is Huffington Post or the Huff Post, which has been shortened to. And then the link that follows. Now, again, if this was a paper I was writing about a political point of view, I probably wouldn't use this article because the Huffington Post has a strong leaning towards one particular political bias, right? And so I wouldn't want to use it for that in that case. But since we are not talking about politics, we're talking about a restaurant and a person's experience with it, then it's perfectly fine. So again, here I summarize. I say Lanier and Hambry focus on the mystique. Let me go and change this. Just a second. On the mystique of Rosa's Cantina, but they focus on the humble and down-to-earth atmosphere that you will find among the locals in Rosa's Cantina. They claim that for a bar with the legend of Marty Robbins in its rearview mirror, it still focuses on what the bar is like, a place to get a drink and some good food. The idea that I would focus on from this article is that the bar has known fame and remains humble, right? So again, this is going to be what I plan on using, and the rest of this is just a general summary of the article in question. So that, in essence, pretty much encapsulates, wraps up what the annotated bib should look like as a whole. Remember that you need to have 3 sources for your paper, and this is going to be that proof to tell me that you are doing the work, that you're getting towards the completion of the paper. It's due, the paper itself is due on the 11th, right? So if we were to take a look at when that is, that's not next Friday, which will be the 4th, but it's going to be the following Friday. So next week, I want you to turn this in so that way I can review your articles, make sure you're using them correctly. Also, in addition to this, to just this annotated bibliography, you must include a photo of you at your location, a selfie, right? It has to be current, so don't put a picture of yourself when you were like 12 years old with your family, right? At some trip or at some restaurant. It needs to be a current picture of you, right? That because you need to be visiting someplace you haven't gone before. I'm not sure if I made that clear, but part of the QEP is to experience the community and things you haven't within the El Paso area, to let you know that there is a lot to do, there is more, and so that way it enriches your experience with El Paso as a whole. And so again, you need to be visiting a new place. When you go to this new place, make sure you include you take a picture of yourself at that location, and that way you can go ahead and include that selfie at the end of your annotated bibliography, so there's no confusion, and that way I have some validation in the fact that you are trying and going to this new experience. The only people that are exempt from this are at the beginning, when I said if you have any sort of limitations that are going to keep you from going to one of these locations, whether it's physical, monetary, or due to employment, whatever it is, then we could work on something else that you could choose to do, versus going to one of these locations. And so if that's still the case, you need to get a hold of me as soon as possible, so that way we can work out what you might choose to do instead of going to visit a location. More than likely it's going to be some local event that happened in El Paso's history, right? So I had talked about the changing of the Chamizal from Mexico to El Paso because of the change in the river, right? The river diverted courses, and ultimately part of what was Mexico became El Paso now, or the United States, etc. Or the old Wild West, right? There's Billy the Kid, who broke his friend out of a jail in San Elizario, or which is an event itself that you can write about. Or in another case, there's the shootout that happened in downtown El Paso in the 1800s, right? Which is called the 4 Dead in 5 Seconds. So again, you may use one of those, but only if you are given permission from me to use a historic event rather than visiting an actual physical location. So I need to understand the circumstances that are going to prevent you from going, if that's the case, so that I can give you permission. Okay, so again, get a hold of me. This is the expectation, this is the assignment that's going to be due next week on the 1st, and that way we can then work towards getting the full paper, everything completed and done, because after we complete this section of the QEP, which is going to be next week, right by the end of the 4th, we'll be done talking about the QEP. We're going to talk about films, right? We're going to talk about film design, structure, things that we can talk about, and then ultimately our goal is to review a film. Now the film can be of your choice, but we'll get a little bit more of that details after next week. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I hope you all have a great day. Bye.